Welcome to another deep dive. This time, into the world of the one and only Glenn Miller. You sent in some excerpts from his Wikipedia page, and it seems like you want to dig a little deeper than the basics. You want to understand his lasting musical impact and try to make sense of the mystery of his disappearance.
It's a story that has captivated people for decades.
Absolutely. And it really is a story that takes you in a lot of different directions. I mean, just thinking about his career, it's just incredible how quickly he rose to fame.
hmm
In just 4 short years, he managed to rack up more top 10 hits than Elvis and the Beatles combined. That just blows my mind. But what really intrigues me is why? Why did his music resonate so deeply with audiences? Was it just his unique sound? Or was it something about the historical context of World War II?
It was probably a combination of factors, I think.
Right.
To really grasp his impact, we need to rewind all the way back to the beginning. Alton Glenn Miller was born in Clarinda, Iowa, and he had a fascinating life. Even from his early days in Iowa and Colorado, music was calling to him.
Hmm.
But he's also a pretty talented athlete. I mean, he even earned the title of best left end in Colorado playing football in high school.
Football star to band later, right? It's quite a leap.
It is.
And, it's a small detail, but it really stands out to me that he actually added that second N to his name in high school. It's almost like he was already thinking about his personal brand even back then. Like he was consciously creating an image.
That's a really interesting observation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does suggest that he was thinking about those things from a young age. This attention to detail would really become a hallmark of his whole career, especially as he moved from playing the trombone to arranging and composing music.
And he has some pretty good mentors, too. He worked with the Dorsey brothers and Benny Goodman, getting experience before venturing out with his own band. And that's when things really took off, right? That's when he really honed that signature Glenn Miller sound. It was revolutionary at the time, wasn't it? Can you break down some of those key elements for us? What made it stand out from other styles at the time, like the hot jazz that was so popular in the 1930s?
Well, what I find fascinating is that Miller was very intentional about creating something completely different. He even said, and I quote, "I don't want a jazz band."
Wow.
It was almost like a rebellion against the kind of improvisational, high-energy style of hot jazz that was all the rage back then.
Right.
Yeah, think of artists like Benny Goodman or Artie Shaw. Their music was fiery and really centered on these individual solos.
So if he didn't want a hot jazz band, then what was he going for?
He wanted to create something much more accessible, something that could appeal to, well, just a much broader audience. So what he ended up with featured a clarinet-led reed section, muted trumpets, and these really smooth harmonies. It was very danceable, romantic, and in a way kind of, well, more controlled. Instead of the flashy solos, he really emphasized these very precise, tightly arranged melodies.
And it's interesting that you say controlled because that kind of circles back to what we were talking about earlier with him adding that second N to his name. This attention to detail, this need for control, was that really a key part of his success?
I think so. I think it played a big role. He was just so meticulous in every aspect of his music.
Yeah.
From the arrangement to the performance, he wanted everything to be absolutely perfect. And it's that precision that really helped to create that, well, that incredibly polished, instantly recognizable Glenn Miller sound.
And audiences responded, right, big time. In the mood, Moonlight Serenade, Chattanooga Choo Choo. These songs became like cultural touchstones. But was it just the music itself, or was there something more at play? I mean, don't forget, this was the late 1930s. The world was on the brink of war.
Oh, absolutely. You can't ignore that context.
Yeah.
The world was a really uncertain, really scary place at the time. People were anxious, worried about the future. Miller's music gave them a sense of escape, a feeling of hope, optimism. It was music you could just lose yourself in, dance to. It could transport you to a happier place, even if just for a little while.
It was like he provided the perfect soundtrack for a generation that was really yearning for simpler times. And his chart success was just off the charts, no pun intended.
Oh, he was everywhere.
Yeah.
5 of his songs held the #1 spot on the charts for most of 1942.
Wow.
It's almost unheard of, really.
Yeah. Unbelievable. And yet, even at the height of all this fame, he makes a decision that surprises just about everyone. He enlists in the Army Air Forces.
Right.
So why? Why walk away from it all?
It really shows you what kind of man he was. You see, Miller had a deep sense of patriotism. He wasn't content with just performing for civilians. He wanted to use his talent to support the war effort. He wanted to, boost troop morale and really use music as a force for good during a very, very dark time.
And it wasn't just about performing for the troops either. He actually wanted to modernize military music, right? Tell us about that.
Right. He found traditional military marches to be, well, a bit too stuffy, outdated. So he wanted to infuse the repertoire with swing, with energy, with the kind of sounds that the younger generation really loved. There's even a story about him using St. Louis blues instead of a Sousa march at a performance. Can you imagine?
Wow, that must have ruffled some feathers.
You bet it did. But it also really highlights how committed he was to innovation. He wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo, even within the military.
Yeah. So he forms this Army Air Forces band, right? And their schedule was even more grueling than his civilian band. Broadcasts, recordings, live performances all across Europe. I mean, they were constantly on the move.
Absolutely. It was an incredibly demanding schedule.
Yeah.
But Miller, he was driven by this sense of purpose.
Yeah.
He really believed in the power of music to uplift and inspire people, particularly during wartime.
Yeah. And then December 15th, 1944 rolls around, and Miller is scheduled to fly from England to Paris to, I guess, make arrangements for his band to move there. But then bad weather causes these frustrating delays.
Right.
It's a decision that would change everything.
And it did. Miller was so frustrated by all the delays that he decided to just hop on this unscheduled flight with a friend of his. The plane took off and, well, vanished.
Yeah.
Just like that. No wreckage was ever found, and no definitive answers ever came to light.
It's the start of a mystery that would last for decades.
A mystery that still fascinates us today.
And we're going to dive into the theories and investigations surrounding Miller's disappearance right after we come back. Stay tuned.
So we're back. And I have to say, thinking about Glenn Miller's disappearance, it's just, well, it's both fascinating and incredibly sad at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So let's dive into some of the theories that have emerged over the years. What are some of the most plausible explanations for what could have happened to that plane?
Well, I think one theory that makes a lot of sense is that it was just a really tragic accident. The weather on that December day was notoriously bad. Thick fog, icy conditions.
Right.
It's totally possible that the pilot, John Morgan, just got disoriented or maybe experienced some kind of mechanical failure, and that led to a crash in the English Channel.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a really busy shipping lane. And if the plane went down there, the wreckage could have been lost so easily.
Exactly. Or even just scattered, making recovery pretty much impossible.
And back then, they didn't have the kind of technology for search and rescue efforts that we have today, right? Nope, not at all. It would have been so much more difficult.
Okay, so we have the possibility of a tragic accident. But what about some of the other theories out there? I know there's been talk of friendly fire, right?
Yeah, that's another theory that's been looked at pretty closely. Allied bombers were on their way back from a mission over Germany that same day, and some people think they might have accidentally released their bombs on Miller's plane, mistaking it for an enemy target.
Oh, wow. That's a scary thought. But is there any evidence to back that up?
There's some circumstantial evidence, for sure. We know that bombs were definitely released near the area where they think Miller's plane was, but there's no concrete proof that one of those bombs actually hit the aircraft.
So it's a possibility, but it's unconfirmed. What about some of the more, shall we say, unconventional theories? I've even heard people say that Miller was on some kind of covert mission or had a secret identity. Some even say he staged his whole disappearance.
Yeah, you always get those theories. They really capture people's imaginations.
Right.
It's fun to imagine, right?
Yeah.
Miller as a secret agent, or living out his days somewhere in South America with a brand new identity.
Right.
But the thing is, those theories are mostly just speculation.
Yeah.
There's not really any evidence to support them.
It seems like with any unsolved mystery, people try to fill in the gaps, and sometimes those explanations, well, they can get a bit out there. But let's talk about the official investigations. What did those actually uncover?
So the official findings, especially the report from the 8th Air Force Board of Inquiry that came out in January 1945, they basically blamed the disappearance on a combination of factors.
Okay.
Human error, some kind of mechanical failure, and just really difficult weather conditions. So they pretty much concluded that the pilot just misjudged his altitude because of the fog, and that led to a crash in the channel.
So the official report leans towards the accident theory. But even with a formal inquiry, it seems like the lack of definitive answers just keeps all those other theories alive.
That's true. You're absolutely right. And over time, people have reinterpreted the existing evidence. For example, there's a recent book called Glenn Miller Declassified.
Oh, okay.
The author, Dennis Sprague, actually challenges some of the long-held beliefs about the disappearance.
Interesting. What's his take?
So Sprague was able to access some documents that were previously classified, and he makes a pretty strong argument that the disappearance was really just a tragic accident that came about because of a series of logistical mishaps.
Okay.
He points to the canceled flights, the last-minute decisions, and the immense pressure that Miller was feeling to get to Paris. And all of those things together, according to Sprague, contributed to this tragedy.
So in his view, no conspiracies, no secret missions or anything like that.
Based on what Sprague found, the most likely scenario is really just a bunch of unfortunate events that just happened to coincide at the wrong time. He even goes so far as to debunk some of the wilder theories, like the one about Miller's plane being shot down over the North Sea. He says that just doesn't line up with the facts that we know.
That's really interesting. So we have the official report and a more recent analysis, and they both seem to think it was an accident. But haven't there also been some independent groups looking into this? I'm thinking of groups like TIGAR, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery.
Oh yeah, TIGAR is an amazing organization. They've investigated a ton of aircraft disappearances, and they actually thought they might have found a possible crash site for Miller's plane. But it was way off course from where he was supposed to be.
Wait, what? A crash site that was off course? How does that fit in with any of the other theories?
That's the thing, it doesn't really fit in with anything. The location that TIGAR was looking at just didn't make sense given what we know about the flight path and the weather conditions.
Yeah.
So even though their interest in the site sparked a lot of excitement, in the end, it didn't really lead to any new discoveries.
So it seems like even after all these investigations, official and independent, the mystery of Glenn Miller's disappearance is still alive and well. What do you think it is about this case that just keeps captivating people, even after all these years?
I think it's a few things, really. You've got this beloved celebrity, a sudden and completely unexplained disappearance, and then this backdrop of World War II. It adds a sense of tragedy and intrigue. And of course, there's the fact that his body and the plane were never found, which just leaves a lot of room for speculation.
It's like those unanswered questions just fuel people's imaginations.
Exactly. And in a way, I think that sense of mystery has become a part of his legacy.
And that brings us back to the music. Even with all the mystery surrounding his disappearance, Glenn Miller's impact on music is just undeniable. Let's explore that in our next segment. How did he shape the sound of an era, and why does his music still resonate with people today? Stay with us. We're back, and I think it's time to shift gears a bit. Move away from the mystery of Glenn Miller's disappearance and focus more on his incredible musical legacy. I mean, it's hard to really overstate just how big of an impact he had on music.
Yeah, absolutely. He really did define the sound of a whole era.
Right.
And you can still feel his influence even today.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. How did Glenn Miller, in just a handful of years, become such a powerhouse in the world of music? What were the key ingredients to his success?
Well, we've talked about that distinctive Glenn Miller sound, right?
Right.
That blend of clarinets and reeds, the muted trumpets, and those incredibly smooth and danceable arrangements. But it wasn't just about the technical stuff. His music had a certain feeling, a real emotional depth that connected with audiences on a whole other level.
Yeah, it's true. When I listen to Moonlight Serenade, it gives me this feeling of, I don't know, romance, nostalgia, maybe even a bit of longing for simpler times. And it's interesting because he achieved this massive popularity during a time when the world was full of uncertainty and turmoil.
That's a really great point. The world was on the edge of war. People were searching for something to hold on to,
Yeah.
something to believe in. Miller's music offered a sense of hope, a feeling of escapism, pure joy, really. You could listen to it and just forget about your troubles for a little while.
It's like he created the perfect soundtrack for a generation that was dealing with a world that felt like it was falling apart. And those songs, I mean, they're iconic, right?
Oh, yeah.
In the Mood, Chattanooga Choo Choo, Pennsylvania 65000, they're instantly recognizable. They've become woven into the fabric of our culture.
They really have. You hear them everywhere, in movies, TV shows, commercials. And it's not just here in America either. His music is popular all over the world. There are Glenn Miller orchestras everywhere keeping those arrangements alive.
Wow, that's incredible. It says a lot about how timeless his music is. But what is it about his particular sound that you think has spoken to so many generations?
I think there's a certain purity to it.
Yeah.
A simplicity that just goes beyond time. It's music that's both sophisticated and really accessible. You could dance to it. You can relax to it. It can make you feel a whole range of emotions.
Yeah.
And even though those arrangements were so meticulously crafted, he never let go of the importance of a good melody. Those tunes are just so catchy, so memorable.
You mentioned the Glenn Miller orchestras that are still performing his music today. Are there any other ways that his legacy is being, preserved or celebrated?
Definitely. There are festivals every year celebrating his life and his music. And then there are museums dedicated to his work and, of course, countless recordings that people still listen to and enjoy. It's not just about preserving the past either.
Hmm.
His music is still inspiring musicians even today.
So he's still influencing artists all these years
Oh,
later.
for sure. There are modern artists who are sampling his music, coming up with new interpretations of his arrangements, and just finding all these creative ways to connect with that classic sound.
That's amazing. It really is a testament to how powerful and lasting his music is. It's fascinating to think that his legacy goes beyond just the music itself. His disappearance, while tragic, has kind of become part of his story, hasn't it?
I think that's kind of unavoidable. The fact that he vanished at the height of his career and we still don't know for sure what happened, it just adds this layer of mystery and intrigue to everything. And maybe it even makes his music a little more powerful,
Yeah.
knowing that it was cut short in such a sudden and mysterious way.
As we wrap up this deep dive, what stands out to you most about Glenn Miller's life and music?
It's hard to pick just one thing,
Hmm.
but I think what really strikes me is just how dedicated he was to his craft. Whether it was perfecting those arrangements, pushing the boundaries of what military music could be, or just putting his heart and soul into every single performance. He was a man who lived and breathed music, and you can hear that passion in every note.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it's true, his passion really does shine through, even after all this time. Well, thank you so much for guiding us through this deep dive into the world of Glenn Miller. I know I've learned so much, and I'm sure our listener has too.
It's been a pleasure. He really was an incredible figure.
And for those of you listening, if you're feeling inspired, I definitely encourage you to check out some of Glenn Miller's music. There's a whole world out there waiting to be discovered. Maybe even try to catch one of those Glenn Miller festivals. If you ever get the chance, you won't regret it.
And who knows, maybe someday that mystery surrounding his disappearance will finally be solved. But until then, the music lives on.
It certainly does. Thanks for joining us.